I didn't think much about the notebook the first time I found it. That probably sounds stupid now, but most things do after they've had time to become important. At the time, it was just another object in another dead man's house. I was 42 that fall, working for a small estate clean-out company outside Columbus. We handled the things families didn't want to handle themselves. Basements full of damp boxes. Garages packed with hardware older than the people selling the house. Kitchens where the calendar was still turned to the month somebody died. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was steady. You develop a way of moving through strangers' lives without stepping too hard on what's left of them. At least, that's what I told myself. My name's Miles Garner. Divorced. No kids. Bad lower back when it rains. I rented a duplex with thin walls and kept too many frozen dinners in the freezer because cooking for one always felt like admitting something. I didn't mind the work most days. Houses tell on people if you give them enough time. What they kept. What they repaired. What they stopped repairing. Sometimes I think I understood other people best after they were gone. This one was a farmhouse about 40 minutes west of the city, out past the last places that bother with sidewalks. White paint going gray. Tin roof patched in 3 places. One long field behind it already cut down for the season. The owner was a man named Walter Kessler, 78, widower, no children, brother living in Arizona handling the sale remotely. No drama. No legal mess. Just a list of rooms, a deadline, and instructions to box anything that looked personal. I went out there alone the first day because the job didn't seem big enough to need a crew yet. It was early October, cold in the shade and warm in the sun. One of those dry afternoons where everything looks finished for the year. The key was under the flower pot by the back step, exactly where the brother said it would be. Inside, the house smelled like old wood, dust, and the faint sweetness of apples gone soft somewhere I couldn't find. Nothing unusual. Living room with furniture too heavy to move without swearing. A kitchen that had been cleaned once, but not recently. Framed photographs on the hallway wall. Mostly black and white, mostly too far away to make out on the first pass. I did what I always do. Walked the rooms. Opened closets. Checked for obvious keepsakes. Made a list. The bedroom held the usual things. A dresser, 2 quilts, 1 lamp, a stack of Western paperbacks on the floor. The bathroom cabinet had more prescription bottles than food in my own kitchen. The study was the last room I checked, and that was where I found the notebook. Small black cover. No label. Tucked into the bottom drawer of an old metal filing cabinet under a neat stack of electric bills and insurance papers. Not hidden exactly, just placed flat, like it belonged with practical things. I almost boxed it with the personal papers and moved on. But when I picked it up, something slipped loose from the back cover and fell into the drawer. A photograph. Not old. Color. A grainy picture of the farmhouse, taken from the road at dusk. At first I thought Walter had taken it himself for insurance or some other ordinary reason. But then I noticed the angle. It wasn't shot straight on. It was taken from behind the line of trees across the road, half hidden by branches, as if whoever took it hadn't wanted to be seen standing there. That made me stop, not because it meant anything yet, just because it felt wrong in a quiet way. I turned the photo over expecting a date or a note. Nothing, just blank white backing and one thumbprint smudged near the corner. Then I opened the notebook. The first half was nothing but dates. Handwritten, neat, steady print. No paragraphs. No journal entries. Just dates followed by short lines. May 11th. Truck at mailbox again May 14. Heard engine at 1:12 on May 16. Barn light on. Then off May 21. Same blue coat near fence line. That kind of thing. At first I assumed Walter had gotten jumpy near the end. Old men living alone in the country notice every noise. My father got that way after my mother died. Every headlight on the road became a question. Every dog barking after dark meant somebody was around. I kept reading. The entries went back almost 6 years. Not daily. Not obsessive in the way movies make it look. That might have been easier to dismiss. These were sparse. Patient. A man writing things down because he had learned nobody believed him when he just said them aloud. July 2nd. Call with no voice, only breathing August 9. Found gate open again September 3. Woman in green car parked past culvert for 18 minutes. October 17. Footprints by pump house, too small for my boots. I stood there in that study with dust moving through the light and read longer than I meant to. Some entries were so ordinary they circled back into unsettling. November 8th. Kitchen curtain moved when there was no wind. December 14. Dog in neighbor's field wouldn't come near our side. Our side. Not my side. That caught me. Walter had been a widower for nearly 9 years according to the intake notes. But every now and then the notebook shifted into the plural, then back again like habit didn't always keep up with loss. I closed it and set it on the desk. The room stayed still around me. Just a study in an empty farmhouse. Bookshelves. A dead fly on the sill. Filing cabinet with one sticky drawer. Nothing dramatic. I told myself the right thing then. Box the notebook. Mark it personal. Move on. Instead, I opened the top desk drawer and found a pair of reading glasses, a dried-up pen, and a county road map folded into quarters. There was a red circle drawn around the property. And then, farther out, 3 more circles placed along the road and near the creek behind the field. No labels. No explanation. Just marks. I don't know why that bothered me more than the notebook. Maybe because maps make people seem serious. A scribbled fear in a notebook can still be fear. A marked map feels like planning. I looked out the study window toward the backfield. The barn sat maybe 60 yards off, leaning a little to one side under a roof patched with fresh metal. Beyond that, a tree line. Beyond that, nothing I could see. It was quiet the way country places get quiet in the middle of the day. Not peaceful exactly, just unoccupied. I folded the map back up and put it with the notebook. Then I went to work. That's the part one still come back to. The plainness of it. I spent the next 2 hours wrapping dishes in newspaper and carrying out boxes of books, all while part of my mind kept circling back to that notebook like a tongue worrying a bad tooth. Nothing urgent happened. No strange noises. No shadow by the fence. Just me, cardboard, dust, and a dead man's neat handwriting sitting in the study. By 4:30 the light had started thinning, and I was in the kitchen taping up a box marked pantry/misc when I heard a vehicle slow down outside. Not pull in, just slow. I went to the front window and looked through the lace curtain. A dark pickup was idling on the road. Couldn't tell you the make. Too far and too dusty. It sat there for maybe 5 seconds, then kept going. That happens in the country. People slow for addresses, dogs, potholes. But as it moved off, I found myself wondering whether Walter had ever stood at the same window and watched that same kind of pause turn into one more line in the notebook. I didn't like that thought. I liked it even less because it felt contagious. Before leaving, I boxed the notebook, the map, and the photograph separately from the bills. I wrote personal papers, study on the side, and set it near the back door with the other keep items. Then I locked the house and drove home. That should have been the end of it. But that night, around 11, I was standing in my kitchen eating cold leftover spaghetti out of a plastic container when I realized I had kept thinking about one entry without meaning to. September 3rd. Woman in green car parked past culvert for 18 minutes. Not because it was the creepiest one. Because of the precision. 18 minutes. Not a while. Not long enough. 18. That's the kind of time you don't write down unless you're already timing it. I put the container back in the fridge and stood there with the door open too long, cold air hitting my knees. Then I told myself I was doing exactly what lonely men do with too much silence. They borrow other people's trouble to fill up their own. I went to bed, slept badly, dreamed about a house seen through trees. The next morning I was back at the farmhouse by 9 with a second guy from work named Colin. Younger than me by 15 years. Still had the kind of energy that makes older men dislike you on sight for no real reason. Good worker, though. I didn't mention the notebook. Didn't mention the photo either. It already felt like the kind of thing that changed shape once said aloud. We worked through the downstairs first. Colin handled furniture measurements while I boxed up the hall closet and front room shelves. Around noon, he found an old lockbox in the bedroom closet and asked if it needed to go on the valuables list. It was empty except for a warranty card and a bundle of keys on a ring. 4 keys total. 2 house keys, 1 padlock key, and 1 long brass key with no markings. Probably junk, Colin said. Maybe, I said, but I kept the ring in my pocket anyway. At lunch, we sat on the back steps with gas station sandwiches and looked out at the field. Colin said, "Place gives me the creeps a little." I looked at him. "Why?" He shrugged. "Just feels like somebody's watching from that barn." He said it jokingly. Mostly. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "You watch too many movies." "Yeah," he said, smiling. "Probably." But after lunch, I found myself going to the study again while he loaded boxes. The notebook was where I'd left it inside the keep box. I took it out and flipped farther ahead this time, into the last year of entries. The handwriting got shakier near the end, but the style stayed the same. Short lines. Facts only. March 6th. They know I write things down March 9. Gate chain move March 18. No tracks, but I heard them by the pump April 2. If anything happens, check the well cover first. I stared at that one long enough that the words started losing shape. Then I read the next line. April 5th. Not the old well. The other one. A draft moved through the study then. Just air from somewhere in the house, settling against another room. Nothing more. Still, I looked over my shoulder. The room was empty. I went back to the page. There were only 4 more entries after that. April 11th. Man in driveway said wrong address, smiling the whole time April 19. Helen was right to worry April 22. Burn the first map April 23. If Miles comes, tell him not to go alone. I read that line 3 times. Then a 4th. You should know my name isn't common enough to shrug off easily. Not in that kind of context. Not in a dead man's notebook. Not in a house I'd only been assigned 2 days earlier. For a while I just stood there holding the page open and listening to Colin drag something heavy across the porch outside. Then I looked back through the notebook to see if I'd missed it earlier. I hadn't. That was the only time my name appeared. Not Miles. Not Mike. Miles. Exact. A stupid number of explanations arrived all at once. Maybe Walter knew the company name from yard sign and guessed right. Maybe his brother had mentioned me on the phone months ago. Maybe there was another Miles entirely, and I was doing what people do when they want coincidence to feel personal. I went through the intake paperwork in my head. The brother in Arizona hadn't asked for me by name. The assignment had come through the dispatcher 3 days ago after another job canceled. Random. Should have been random. I read the line again. If Miles comes, tell him not to go alone. Not came. Comes. Like Walter had been expecting a man he had never met. From the porch, Colin called. "You got a minute?" I shut the notebook too fast and nearly dropped it. "Yeah." My voice sounded normal enough. That bothered me. I took the notebook and map and slipped them into my work bag before stepping out of the study. Colin was standing at the back door with one of the boxes. "You mind checking the barn?" he asked. "There's a bunch of shelf brackets in there. Maybe tools too. Could save us another trip if we know what's worth hauling." For 1 second I almost said no. Couldn't have told you why in a way that didn't sound foolish. Then I remembered the entry. Don't go alone. That line had lodged somewhere behind my ribs. So I said, "Yeah, we'll both go." Colin gave me a strange look. Sure, the walk to the barn wasn't long, but it felt longer because neither of us talked much. Dry grass under our boots. Wind moving through cut stalks in the far field. The barn doors stood half open, one hinge slightly lower than the other. From up close it smelled like old hay, rust, and damp wood. No electricity running to it anymore. I pulled the door wider and let the light in. Inside, shelves, a workbench, feed bins, broken rake handles, one rusted mower frame. Nothing remarkable. Colin stepped in first and kicked at a coil of hose. "See? Serial killer free." I might have smiled if I hadn't noticed the floor. There were marks in the dust. Not fresh boot prints exactly. More like something heavy had been dragged recently from the back wall toward the center, then back again. Faint enough to miss unless you were already looking. "Colin," I said. "Yeah." "Did you come out here this morning?" He turned. "No." I pointed down. He looked at the marks and frowned. Maybe the brothers stopped by before putting the place on the market. Maybe, but the dust over the workbench said otherwise. No fingerprints. No disturbed tools. Just those 2 long, shallow drag lines near the rear section of the floor. Colin followed them with his eyes until they disappeared beneath a stack of warped plywood sheets leaning against the back wall. "You think there's something under there?" I didn't answer. Not because I was trying to be dramatic. Because I had suddenly become very aware of the brass key in my pocket, the circles on the map, and the dead man's final instruction written in careful, shaking print. Not the old well. The other one. And for the first time since finding the notebook, I had the distinct, unpleasant feeling that whatever Walter had been afraid of wasn't just outside watching the house. It had been waiting for someone to keep reading. For a while, neither of us moved. That probably sounded dramatic, but it wasn't. It was the kind of pause ordinary men fall into when something small stops making sense and the rest of the world hasn't caught up yet. Colin stood with one hand on his hip, looking at the drag marks in the dust. I stood near the door with Walter's notebook pressing against the side of my work bag like it had weight beyond paper. The plywood sheets leaned against the back wall in a rough fan, warped from years of damp and heat. Nothing about them looked staged. That was part of the problem. If they'd been too neat, too obvious, I might have trusted my own suspicion less. Colin broke the silence first. "You want me to move them?" I looked at the floor again. The marks were faint, but they were there. Two parallel drags, maybe 6 inches apart, running out from beneath the stacked plywood and then back again. Not fresh enough to be today. Not old enough to disappear. "Yeah," I said. "Let's move them." He shrugged and stepped forward. We pulled the first sheet aside, then the second. Dry with scraping concrete. Dust lifting in soft gray threads. The smell of old rot came up stronger near the back wall. Behind the plywood, there wasn't much at first. Just rough boards, mouse droppings, one rusted bucket, and a section of poured concrete floor darker than the rest. Then Colin crouched down. "What's that?" I joined him. There was an iron ring set flat into the concrete. Small, rusted, almost the same color as the floor around it. If you weren't looking directly at it, you'd miss it. For a second I didn't say anything, because I knew what it looked like. Not a drain, not a utility anchor. A pull ring, like on an old hatch. Colin touched it with 2 fingers. "Well, that's not creepy at all. Don't pull it yet." He looked up at me. "You say that like you got a reason." I thought about the notebook in my bag, about the entries, about the line that used my name like a destination Walter had been waiting for. "No real reason," I said. "Just let me look." He sat back on his heels and gave me room. I brushed dust from around the ring. The concrete there wasn't poured as one slab. There was a square seam around it, maybe 2 feet by 2 feet, tight enough to vanish under grime unless you were close. A hatch, built into the barn floor. The light in the doorway had shifted while we were working, thinner now, more sideways. Outside, the field stayed still. Wind moved through dry weeds near the fence line and made them shiver without sound. Colin said, "You think it's a root cellar or something?" "Maybe, but not the old well." I turned too fast to hide it. He noticed. "Okay," he said slowly. "So what exactly is going on?" I should have lied better, or told the truth cleanly. Instead, I gave him the kind of half answer that only makes things worse. "I found a notebook in the house." "What kind of notebook?" "Walter's. Just dates and observations mostly. And one of them said, 'Don't open murder hatches in the barn.'" "No." He waited. I rubbed a hand over the back of my neck. "One of them said to check the other well." Colin frowned. "Other than what?" "I don't know. And you didn't think to mention this earlier?" I looked at the hatch again. "No," I said. I didn't. That wasn't fair to him, and I knew it. But some things feel less ridiculous before you say them aloud. Once spoken, they either become real or collapse, and I hadn't been ready for either outcome. Colin stood up and dusted off his jeans. "All right," he said. "So we got a weird notebook, a hidden hatch, and you looking like a man who just remembered he left the stove on in another county." I almost smiled at that. Almost. Then he added, "I'm not opening that thing unless you tell me everything." So I did. Not elegantly. Not in some polished sequence. I told him about the notebook, the photograph from the tree line, the circles on the map, the entries that read like a man teaching himself to stay precise, and finally the line with my name. He listened without interrupting. That was one of the better things about Colin. Younger guys get dismissed for talking too much when mostly they just haven't learned yet who's worth going quiet for. When I finished, he looked at the hatch for a long time. Then he said, "You sure Walter didn't know the company and just write her name down from a flyer or something?" "No." "Why not?" "Because our company never serviced this address before. I checked the work order history this morning." That part was true. I'd looked for exactly that reason and found nothing. Colin folded his arms. "So either a dead man somehow knew you'd show up here, or there's another explanation we haven't earned yet." "Yeah. You got a preference?" "Not really." He bent and touched the iron ring again. "Well, The universe only gives you so many hatches before it expects follow-through. Before I could answer, we both heard it. A vehicle on the road. Not slowing this time. Stopping. We turned toward the barn opening. Through the gap in the doors, I could see the front edge of the driveway and part of the road beyond the mailbox. A dark SUV had pulled over near the ditch. Not in the drive. Just off to the side like somebody deciding whether to commit to a visit. Engine still running. Windows dark. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then the driver's door opened. A woman got out. 40s maybe. Dark green jacket. Hair tied back. She stood beside the SUV looking toward the house, but not moving closer. I felt something in my chest go cold and quiet. Woman in green car. I said before I meant to. Colin looked at me. What? I didn't answer. Because I didn't know if it was the same person or because saying the entry aloud felt like inviting it in. The woman remained where she was. One hand in her jacket pocket. Not waving. Not calling out. Just standing there with the kind of patience that made distance feel intentional. Colin said, "You know her?" "No." "You look like you do." "No." I said again, sharper this time. He let it go. For maybe 20 seconds she stayed by the SUV. Then she got back in and drove away. Just like that. Neither of us said anything after the sound of the engine faded. The barn seemed quieter than before. "Okay," Colin said finally. "Now I want this open." I should have said no. Should have called the boss. Told him the property had structural issues or possible legal complications. Stepped back into procedure. Instead I crouched and put my fingers through the iron ring. The metal felt colder than it should have. I pulled. At first nothing happened. Then the hatch shifted with a dry suction sound and lifted an inch, releasing a gust of air that smelled damp, mineral, and old enough to have been sealed on purpose. Colin grabbed the far edge and helped. Together we pulled it back. Underneath was a square shaft lined with stone, descending maybe 8 feet before opening into darkness. Not a root cellar. Too narrow at the top. No ladder either. Just old iron rungs set into one side of the wall. A lightless drop into ground that had been there longer than the barn. "Well," Colin said quietly. "That's a well." I stared down into it. He was right. Not a water well in use, but an old cut stone shaft, capped over some time later and hidden under concrete. The other well. I reached into my bag for the flashlight and aimed it down. Stone walls. Moisture glinting. Rungs rusted but intact. At the bottom, maybe 10 feet down, the shaft widened slightly into a shallow chamber no bigger than a closet. The beam caught something pale there. Cloth, maybe. Or paper. Couldn't tell. Colin leaned over beside me. "You are absolutely not going down there alone." That brought back Walter's line, so hard it felt like being nudged from behind. "If Miles comes, tell him not to go alone." I swallowed. "No," I said. "I'm not." There are moments when a man knows he's crossed out of ordinary life and into something that will keep changing shape no matter how careful he gets. This was one of them. Not because the shaft was dramatic, because it made the notebook retroactively serious. Walter hadn't been rambling. He had been leaving instructions. For what? Colin asked, more to himself than me. I didn't answer. Instead, I checked the rungs with the flashlight again. Old, but they looked anchored. The shaft walls sweated with damp. At the bottom, the pale thing rested against the stone like it had been placed rather than dropped. "Wait here," I said. Colin gave me a look. "You don't get to say that sentence right now. I'm getting gloves." From the truck, we walked back together without discussing whether we should stop. The house stood quiet under the afternoon light, every window dull and unreadable. I found myself looking toward the study window, half expecting a curtain movement I could blame on draft if I had to. Nothing. At the truck, I pulled out work gloves, a second flashlight, and a coil of utility rope I kept for tie-downs and stubborn furniture. Colin took the second flashlight and said, "In case this turns into a horror movie, I want it on record that I argued for ignorance." Noted. Back at the barn, I tested the first rung with my boot. It held. Then the second. The shaft took the light with it as I descended, walls tightening around my shoulders, cold stone smell rising stronger. The temperature dropped fast, enough that the back of my neck prickled. "You good?" Colin called from above. "Yeah." The sound of my own voice came back wrong, swallowed by the stone. At the bottom, the shaft widened into a cramped pocket, maybe 4 feet across. Dirt floor. Stone on 3 sides. One side reinforced with old timber that looked added later. And there, propped carefully against the wall, was a metal cash box. Gray, rust blooming at the corners. Ordinary enough to be almost disappointing. On top of it sat a folded dish towel, and beneath the towel the pale thing I'd seen from above. An envelope. My name was written on the front. Again, same steady, practical handwriting as the notebook. Miles. For a second I just crouched there staring at it. Because one time can still be a trick of timing. 2 times starts pressing against whatever excuses a person has left. You seeing something? Colin called. Yeah. What? A box. And I paused. An envelope. Please tell me it doesn't have your name on it. I looked up toward the square of light and said nothing. He leaned farther over the opening. Oh, come on. I picked up the envelope. Dry. Light. Unsealed. Inside was a single folded page torn from a legal pad. I opened it with gloved hands. The note was short. Miles, if you found this, then I waited too long or you came too late. Either way, don't trust a brother. Don't trust the road. Burn the green map after you memorize it. If the dog chain is gone, leave immediately. There are 2 reasons they watched the house. One is what I kept. The other is who they think will come for it. You won't understand that yet that I am sorry about Helen. That last line drained the feeling from my hands. Helen. My mother's name. I hadn't heard anyone outside family say it in years. She died when I was 19. Walter Kessler should not have known her. Should not have known me. Should not have been apologizing to me from inside a hidden well in his barn. I read the note again to make sure the words hadn't changed while I was startled. They didn't. Above me, Colin said, Miles. I folded the page slowly. Yeah. You look like the bottom just got deeper. I put the note in my pocket and lifted the metal cash box. Heavier than it looked. Locked. Then I noticed something else tucked behind it, half hidden in the shadow of the timber brace. A chain. Not attached to anything now. Just lying there in a loose coil with one snapped end and an old bolt latch at the other. Dog chain. Rusty. Heavy. Recently broken. Hard to tell in that light, but not ancient. I stared at it long enough that Colin asked, What now? I looked up at the opening. The square of daylight seemed smaller. Pull me up, I said. What happened? Just pull me up. He dropped the rope. I tied the cash box handle off to it, looped the other end around my wrist for balance, and climbed. At the top, Colin grabbed the box before I was fully out and set it on the barn floor. I followed, breathing harder than the depth deserved. You want to tell me what the hell is going on? No, I said honestly. I want to know first. I showed him the note. He read it once. Then again, slower. When he got to the line about Helen, he looked up sharply. That your mom? Yeah. He handed the note back without comment. Smart enough not to ask the obvious question because I was already living inside it. We both looked at the cash box. Locked. Scuffed. Nothing special. Except now it felt like the center of the property. What's in it? Colin asked. No idea. You got the key? That brought me up short. The ring from the bedroom closet. The long brass key. I pulled it from my pocket and held it next to the cash box lock. Not a perfect match from a glance, but close enough to make my stomach tighten. Before I tried it, something moved outside. Not in the field. Closer. A sound like gravel shifting under weight. Colin heard it too and looked toward the door. We both went still. Then came a second sound. A light metallic clink from somewhere, just outside the barn. Not random. Recognizable. Chain against metal. I felt the note in my pocket like a pulse. If the dog chain is gone, leave immediately. The chain from the shaft was on the floor beside the open hatch, which meant it had been gone before we found it. Which meant Walter's instruction had just arrived too late to be useful. Colin whispered, Was there a dog here? No. Another clink outside. Then one slow scrape along the barn door, low to the ground, moving left to right. Not an animal. Too measured. Colin reached for the pry bar leaning against the workbench. I picked up the cash box with one hand and the flashlight with the other. Truck, I said quietly. What about the hatch? Leave it. We can't just. Mo. He blinked. What? The note said not to trust the road. What is that even? Get to the truck, Colin. That was when the voice came from outside the barn. A man's voice. Older. Calm. close enough that he could have been leaning against the wood. "You finally found it," he said. Neither of us answered. The voice continued, almost conversational. "Walter always was sentimental about the wrong things." Colin looked at me. I looked at the open door, the angled sunlight, the strip of yard beyond it, and with a clarity I can still feel now, I understood two things at once. First, whoever was outside knew exactly what was under the barn floor. Second, he had not come because of Walter. He had come because Walter had been right about me. For a second, the three of us just stayed where we were. Me inside the barn with Walter's cash box in one hand, Colin near the workbench with a pry bar, and the man outside the door, close enough that his voice came through the wood like he was speaking into the room from another version of it. "You don't have to make this difficult," he said. His tone was steady, not threatening. That bothered me more than shouting would have. Men who already think they're in control rarely need volume. Colin kept his eyes on me. "You know him?" "No." "Sounds like he knows you." "Yeah." The man outside gave a soft breath, almost a laugh. "I know enough." The afternoon light at the barn door looked flatter now, thinner. It had that late-day feel where shadows stop moving quickly and start settling in for the night. I could hear nothing else from outside. No other footsteps. No vehicle doors. Just the dry hush of wind through field grass and the voice waiting near the entrance. "Is there anybody else with you?" I called. A pause. Then, "There doesn't need to be." That wasn't an answer, which made it one. I set the flashlight on the workbench, pointing toward the floor, keeping the barn dim, but not dark. My mind had gotten very calm in that unpleasant way it does when fear stops feeling emotional and becomes practical. Walter's note pressed against my leg in my pocket. "Don't trust the brother. Don't trust the road. Burn the green map after you memorize it. If the dog chain is gone, leave immediately." And that other line. There are two reasons they watch the house. One is what I kept. The other is who they think will come for it. Who they think will come for it. I looked down at the cash box, then at the brass key in my hand, then toward the barn door again. "Who are you?" I asked. The answer came after just enough silence to feel chosen. "Friend of your mother's." I felt my back teeth touch. My mother had been dead more than 20 years. No one who knew her should have been appearing outside a dead man's barn the same day I found a note with her name in it. "What was her name?" I asked. Another pause. Then the man said, "Helen." He got that part right. Colin's eyes flicked to me. I didn't move. "Last name," I said. Outside, the voice lost a little of its patience. "This isn't useful." "No," I said quietly. "It is." He didn't answer. And there it was. Maybe he knew my mother's first name. Maybe Walter had. Maybe somebody had gone through records or old letters or whatever else men like that go through when they want to build a door into a stranger's head. But if he knew her, he'd know the rest. He didn't, which meant he was working from fragments. That helped more than I expected. "What do you want?" I asked. "The box." "That's simple." "Yes." "No." That answer came easier than I thought it would. Outside, the man was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Walter made this dramatic. He always did when he ran out of better options. Give me the box and you and your friend can go home. Nothing about this has to become personal." Colin muttered under his breath. "Feels a little late for that." I agreed. The man continued, calm as ever. "You found a hidden well under a barn floor, Mr. Garner. It was personal before you arrived." Hearing my name in his voice made something tighten in my chest. Not panic, recognition of pressure. I've known men like that at work, in divorce mediation, in insurance offices after accidents. Men who stay polite because politeness itself is leverage. It tells you they don't need to show you the next step unless you force it. So I decided to force it. I nodded once to Colin and moved my eyes toward the back of the barn. He understood enough to shift his stance. There was a narrow side door back there half blocked by feed bins and a mower frame. I noticed it earlier and filed it away without thinking much. Old barns always have extra exits, most of them swollen shut or hanging on one hinge. Maybe it opened. Maybe it didn't. But it was the only direction that didn't lead through the man outside. I raised my voice just enough. "If you know so much," I said, "then tell me why Walter wrote my name before I ever got assigned this job." No answer. "That's what I thought," I said. And then, before the man outside could speak again, I turned and threw the flashlight hard into the stack of metal feed pans by the wall. The crash inside the barn was enormous. At the same second, Colin shoved the workbench sideways into the main door path, and I ran for the back. The man outside reacted fast. I heard one step, then another, then the barn door slam wide as he came in. But he'd moved toward the noise, not us. That bought maybe 2 seconds. Sometimes 2 seconds is a full career. I kicked at the side door. Nothing. Kicked again. The swollen wood cracked at the latch and burst outward into weeds and cold air. Go! Colin got there first, squeezing through with the pry bar. I followed with the cash box, catching my shoulder hard on the split frame. Behind us the man shouted, "Stop!" His voice had changed at last. No more patience. We ran behind the barn into waist-high weeds and rough ground sloping toward the tree line. The field looked flatter from the house side. Behind the barn it broke into old drainage ruts and patches of brush, with a creek bed farther back half hidden by sycamores. "Truck!" Colin shouted. Not the road. That came out harsher than I meant, but he didn't argue. We kept running. My lungs started burning fast. I wasn't built for sprinting through uneven ground, carrying a metal lockbox full of somebody else's secrets. Colin stayed half a stride ahead, looking back every few seconds. At the tree line, we dropped into cover and finally crouched. No gunshots. No immediate pursuit through the brush. Just the barn behind us, half visible through weeds and the back field turning gold gray under sinking light. "You want to tell me the plan?" Colin asked. "No." "Excellent. Love a confident leader." I bent over, hands on my knees for a second, then forced myself upright. "We need the map." "What map?" "Walter's study. Green Row map." He stared at me. "That's in the house." "Yeah. You just told me not to trust the road, and now you want to go back to the house with barn guy doing whatever barn guys do." "I know. That's not a plan, Miles. That's a confession." He wasn't wrong. I looked toward the creek, then back toward the barn and house. The property sat in a loose triangle from where we were. Barn to the right, house ahead left, road beyond. If the man outside had come alone, he'd likely check the truck first, then the road, then the house. If he wasn't alone, then this was already worse than I could budget for. "What if we just open the box?" Colin asked. I looked down at it. Locked gray metal. Mud on one corner from when I jumped the barn threshold. Ordinary enough to insult the trouble around it. "We might," I said. But if Walter hid the maps separately, there was a reason. Or he was old and paranoid. Maybe. He rubbed a hand over his face. "You keep saying maybe like it helps." "It helps me keep moving." That quieted him. We listened. Still no sound of pursuit. Then, faintly, from the front of the property, an engine turned over. Colin looked at me. "SUV. Maybe." We moved lower through the brush toward the creek, using the dip in the land to keep out of sight. The water wasn't much, just a narrow run through mud and stone, but the banks were steep enough to hide a man if he stayed down. When we reached it, I set the cash box on a flat rock and finally tried the brass key. It slid into the lock cleanly. That alone made my stomach tighten. I looked at Colin once. Then I turned it. The lock clicked. Neither of us opened the lid right away. There's a particular dread in knowing the answer is now one hand movement away. While the box stays closed, possibility still does some of the work for you. Once opened, you owe reality a reaction. Colin said, "You first." "Thanks." I lifted the lid. Inside there wasn't money. No pistol. No stack of letters. Just 3 things. A cassette tape in a clear plastic case. A small bundle of photographs bound with a rubber band. And a sealed manila envelope marked in Walter's hand. "For Miles only." I stared at it. Could this get any more direct? Colin asked quietly. I took the photos first. Most were old. Faded color prints from the late 80s or early 90s maybe. Rural roads. A gas station. 2 men standing beside a pickup. A woman in front of a house I didn't recognize. Then one photograph near the middle stopped me cold. My mother, younger than I ever knew her. Standing in a field with wind, lifting her hair, one hand raised against the sun. Beside her stood Walter Kessler, also younger, and another man whose face had been cut out of the photo with scissors. Not torn, carefully cut out. I felt all the air in my chest go still. Colin saw my face. "That her?" "Yeah." My voice sounded strange to me. There are moments grief comes back without warning. But this wasn't that exactly. This was worse. This was discovering grief had apparently been edited. I turned the photograph over. On the back, in Walter's handwriting, summer of 1991, before he started taking names. Colin read that too and went quiet. I set the photograph aside and picked up the sealed envelope. My name looked almost apologetic on the front. I opened it carefully. Inside was a letter, 3 handwritten pages, folded tight. I read the first line and had to start over because my hands were shaking harder than they should have. Miles, if this reached you, then the man your mother feared has either found the property or guessed that I believed you would come someday. I pray it is the second, but I have lived too long to trust prayer over patterns. I kept reading. Walter had known my mother in 1991. Not well at first. Through county land surveys, road assessments, and then later through what he called the meetings, which he never defined cleanly. A loose group, local and unofficial, handling disputes over property lines, easements, and old wells on farms too remote or too poor for lawyers to bother with quickly. Then a man had joined them. Not government. Not local exactly. A man who started asking questions that weren't about land. Who owned which road access? Which families stayed and which left? Which properties had old capped wells, pump houses, secondary structures, hidden storage from previous generations? The letter called him Wren and never gave a first name. Walter wrote that my mother noticed first that Wren wasn't interested in the land itself. He was interested in where things could disappear. People, maybe. Records, certainly. Cash, vehicles, names. When she started keeping her own notes, Wren found out. She took something from him before she died. Not money. Not proof the way television means proof. A list. A partial one. Names connected to properties used for things nobody put on deeds. Walter never said exactly whether my mother had stolen it or copied it. Only that she gave part of it to him to keep away from the road. I read that line twice. Away from the road. That was what this was. Or part of it. The cassette tape. Maybe more names. The photographs. Maybe leverage. The map. Maybe locations. I kept going. Helen believed that if anything happened to her, he would assume one of two things. Either she destroyed the copy, or she gave it to someone she trusted less than family and more than law. She said that man might be you one day, though you were still young and angry and would have hated being chosen. She was right about the anger. I do not know if she was right about the rest. I stopped there for a second. The creek moved quietly beside us. Leaves shifted overhead. The world kept being a world, which felt insulting. My mother had died in a car accident on Route 40. Rain. Truck crossing center line. At least that was the story that stayed in the family, because families survive on what they can carry. I looked back down. Walter's handwriting shook more in the last page. The brother called because he thinks I kept only papers. He does not know about the tape. He sold the story of my decline to men who prefer old farmers to sound confused. I let him. Age is useful camouflage. If Wren is the man asking for the box, do not let him hear the tape before you do. If Wren is already dead, then fear whoever learned his habits. They will sound patient. They will know just enough about your mother to seem close to the truth. That answered one thing at least. The man at the barn was likely Wren, or someone pretending well enough to matter the same way. The last lines were shorter. The green map marks the places where names were stored and moved. Burn it after memory. The well was safer than the house until the dog chain broke. That I am sorry. I failed her, D. Oh, not fail her quietly. I lowered the pages slowly. For a few seconds, neither Colin nor I said anything. Then he asked, very carefully, "Your mom wasn't in road surveys, was she?" "No." "What was she in?" I looked at the photo again. My mother beside Walter. The missing face cut clean from the image. Summer light trapped in cheap paper. She worked county records, I said. Property transfers, historical indexing, that kind of thing. She used to bring files home. Colin let out a long breath. So this is what? Corruption? Missing people? Land fraud? Yes, I said. Probably. Probably. I don't know the size yet. That is maybe the most upsetting thing you've said. A sound carried faintly from uphill. An engine again. Closer this time. We both looked toward the rise beyond the creek. No visual yet. Just sound. House, I said. Colin blinked. You still want the map? Yes. Why? Because if that letter is real, then this property isn't the only one. And if it's not real, I'll look at the tape in the box. Then I want to know that before somebody kills me over a dead man's scrapbook. That got a humorless nod out of him. We repacked the box quickly. Tape, photos, letter back inside. I kept the photograph of my mother in my jacket pocket without meaning to think about it. We moved along the creek bed toward the far side of the property, where a line of brush came up near the rear of the house. From there we could approach without crossing open yard. The house looked different now. Not haunted, not sinister. Involved. Every window part of the problem. Every quiet room holding its shape too well. As we got closer, I saw the dark SUV parked by the front drive again. Driver's door open. Nobody visible. Green jacket. Colin whispered. Maybe. The study was on the back corner of the house. One window low enough to reach if unlocked. I'd opened it earlier for air while boxing papers and forgotten to latch it again. That carelessness might have saved us. We crouched beneath the sill. I listened. No voices inside. No footsteps. Just the old house, settling, and a refrigerator motor running somewhere deeper in. I eased the window up. We climbed in. The study smelled the same as before. Dust, old paper, dry wood. But the room had changed in one crucial way. The desk drawer was open. I had closed it before. The filing cabinet bottom drawer was also open, hanging out an inch. Someone's been here, Colin whispered. Yeah. I moved to the desk. The key box I'd left near the wall was gone. My throat tightened. Then I saw a folded green rectangle beneath the chair. The map. Somebody had dropped it or kicked it there while searching. I grabbed it and shoved it inside my jacket. At the same time, from the hallway, came one floorboard creak. We both froze. Another. Slow. Measured. Not try to hide now. A woman's voice came from the hall. Calm. Low. Familiar in the way dread is familiar once it reaches you. You should have stayed by the barn. I looked at Colin. Then toward the doorway. The woman in the green jacket stepped into view holding nothing in her hands. Mid-40s. Hair tied back. Same patient stillness she'd worn by the SUV. She looked at the open study, at my jacket where the map now was, and then at the cash box in Colin's grip. No surprise in her face at all. Just a quiet kind of disappointment. You opened it without him, she said. I didn't answer. She gave a small nod, as if that confirmed something for her. Then she looked directly at me and said the sentence that took what was left of the day and broke it clean in half. Helen told me you'd have your father's expression when the truth finally reached you.